The quiet car and the load. It was a quiet evening in a small California town, the kind of place where people nodded at each other in grocery stores and neighbors still shared coffee over fences. The sun was setting low, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges, and casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of an old parking lot near the coast. It was the kind of lot that once belonged to a diner long since shut down, now used by locals who knew it was free, peaceful, and overlooked the ocean. In the corner of that lot sat a car. Not just any car. It was a 1969 Mustang Fastback, restored to near perfection, its matte black paint catching the dying sunlight in a way that made it seem alive. There were no stickers, no loud colors, no polished chrome screaming for attention. Just timeless beauty, calm and mysterious. For most who passed by, it was just a classic car, maybe owned by some local collector. But they had no idea who it belonged to. No one had seen the driver come or go. It had appeared there a few days ago and hadn't moved since. Some thought it was abandoned. Others whispered stories. Meanwhile, in a nearby gas station just down the road, 3 bikers were causing a storm. They weren't from town. You could tell by their leather vests, the loudness of their voices, the way they acted like they owned every space they walked into. One of them, the tallest with a scar running across his forehead, went by the name Viper. The second, shorter but muscular, answered to Chains. The third, wild-eyed and twitching, was simply called Rabid. Together they rolled in like thunder wherever they went, feeding off the silence they shattered. They weren't just troublemakers. They were looking for something to break. And tonight, they had nothing to lose. "Yo," Chains muttered as he glanced out the gas station window, sipping on a stolen soda. "You see that black beauty sitting all alone?" Viper followed his gaze and smirked. "Yeah, too clean for this dump. Probably some rich jerk showing off." Rabid licked his lips, eyes glinting. "Let's go say hello. Maybe leave our signature." They laughed, loud and careless, tossing their trash on the floor as they walked out. The gas station clerk, a timid kid barely out of high school, watched them go and felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had seen that car before, and he had also seen the man who owned it. Quiet, kind, eyes that had seen a world most people couldn't imagine, but the man had left no name, only a smile and a thank you. The bikers roared their engines and sped down the road. They parked by the lot, tires screeching as they swung into the open space like they were filming a movie. Then they saw it. The Mustang, untouched, parked at an angle that seemed almost deliberate. "Too easy," Viper said, pulling out a heavy chain from his saddlebag. Chains walked up first, dragging his boot along the side of the car, leaving a long scrape in the paint. "Oops," he said with a fake gasp. "My bad." Rabid cackled and threw a rock at the windshield. It cracked, but didn't shatter. He grabbed a crowbar and began smashing the hood, again and again, laughing like a child at a carnival. A few cars passed on the nearby street. Some drivers slowed down but didn't stop. A few recorded from a distance but kept driving. No one wanted to get involved. In this world, people had grown used to turning away. Back at the edge of the lot, under the shadows of an old oak tree, a figure stood. He had been there the whole time, leaning against the tree, arms folded, just watching. He wore a black hoodie, jeans, and a pair of worn boots. His beard was light, and his hair a little messy. Nothing about him screamed, movie, star. Nothing about him screamed anything, really. But it was him, Keanu Reeves. He had been in town for 2 weeks, hiding from the chaos of fame, the noise of Hollywood, the burden of always being seen. He had no team, no entourage. Just his car, a backpack, and a quiet room above a bookstore owned by a widow he had once helped when her husband passed. He never gave his name. She called him K, and he liked it that way. Keanu watched them destroy the car. He felt something rise in his chest, not anger, not sadness. Something older, something deeper. He had lived 1,000 lives on screen. But in real life, pain was real. People were real. And tonight, those bikers weren't breaking a machine. They were breaking something sacred. He took one slow step forward. One of the bikers, rabid, caught sight of him. "Yo," he shouted, lifting the crowbar. "This your junk?" Keanu didn't speak. He just kept walking, slow and steady, his eyes locked with Viper's. The leader frowned, sensing something strange, something that didn't fit. "You got a problem?" Viper asked, stepping forward, chain swinging lazily in his hand. Keanu finally spoke. His voice was calm, quiet, but it cut through the night like a blade. "You shouldn't have done that." "Oh?" Chains laughed, stepping behind Keanu to flank him. "What's a guy like you gonna do?" Keanu stopped walking, stood still, and then looked at the car, his eyes softening just for a second. "That car was the last gift my father left me. He rebuilt it with his own hands, every piece, every screw. He passed away before we could drive it together." The bikers paused. Viper raised an eyebrow. "So what? You want an apology?" Keanu turned to him. "No, I want you to remember this moment, because from here, everything changes." Chains rolled his eyes and stepped forward. "Man, I've had enough of this." He raised a fist, but the punch never landed. Keanu moved. Not like a fighter, not like a movie hero, but like a storm. Silent. Sharp. Sudden. Chains went down first, stunned wind knocked out of him. Rabid tried to swing, but Keanu ducked, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it in one smooth motion. The crowbar clattered to the ground. Viper backed away, hand reaching for something in his vest, but then froze. Not because of fear, but because he saw something in Keanu's eyes, something ancient, something that couldn't be bought or broken. In the distance, headlights appeared. A truck slowed down and stopped near the lot. It was the old bookstore widow. She had seen everything. And with her were two officers she had called when she saw the bikers earlier from her window upstairs. Viper dropped the chain. Keanu stood, still breathing slowly, his face unreadable. The officers approached, and one of them asked, "Sir, are you all right?" Keanu nodded. They were just leaving. Rabid groaned on the ground, clutching his wrist. Chains was still trying to breathe. Viper stood silent, unsure what to say. The officer looked confused. "Sir, do you want to press charges?" Keanu looked at his car, then at the three men. "No," he said quietly. "They already lost more than they know." And with that, he turned and walked away into the darkness. But just before he disappeared, he whispered to the old woman, "Can you call someone for me? Someone who restores old cars?" She smiled gently, eyes filled with tears. "Of course, Kay." But what Keanu didn't know was that one of the people watching from a nearby rooftop had recorded everything, and that video was about to change everything. It would spread faster than any film trailer, and the world would soon know what true humility, true strength, and true kindness looked like, because tomorrow morning, headlines would explode. But Keanu? He just wanted his father's car to live again, and as the sun disappeared completely, behind the ocean, the stars blinked awake, witnesses to a story that was only just beginning. The roar of redemption, the morning came slowly, as if the sky itself hesitated to rise after what had happened the night before. Clouds hovered low over the coastal town, casting a gray hue over the streets and rooftops while the sound of the tide echoed faintly in the background. But inside the quiet bookstore above which Keanu Reeves had been staying, a storm was already building, only this time it wasn't chaos he feared. It was attention, unwanted, uncontrolled, and coming faster than he could prepare for. Keanu sat at the small table by the window, a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee between his hands. He wasn't looking at the ocean today. His eyes were on the old Mustang, in the lot below, now surrounded by people, neighbors, mechanics, reporters, and a few kids with their phones out, whispering in disbelief. Yellow caution tape had been strung around the damaged car, but it wasn't a crime scene anymore. It was a monument, a reminder. Last night's video had already gone viral. It showed everything, not just the destruction of the car, but the way Keanu had handled it. The quiet voice, the restraint, the truth he spoke about his father. And when people realized it was him, the man who had walked away instead of fighting, the man who forgave rather than sued, the internet didn't just react, it exploded. Yet while the world celebrated the moment, Keanu sat in silence, heart heavy. To him, it wasn't a victory. It was a deep wound reopened. The Mustang wasn't just a car. It was the last piece of his father that had still breathed, still moved. The last drive they had planned never happened. His father had died. Before they could fix the transmission together, Keanu had finished it alone, bolt by bolt, haunted by memories of rough hands guiding his own and a gravelly voice that used to say, "Take your time, son. The engine will tell you when it's ready." And now, after all that, the car sat mangled under the weight of senseless cruelty. A soft knock came at the door. It was the bookstore widow, Mrs. Alara. She was holding a folded newspaper and wore a worried look that didn't suit her gentle face. Without speaking, she set the paper on the table in front of him. The front page showed a still frame from the video, Keanu standing in front of his crushed car, calm and unmoved, with the headline beneath it reading, "Hollywood's Silent Hero. Keanu Reeves shows the world what grace really looks like." He sighed, pushing the paper aside. "I didn't want this, Ilara." She nodded, sitting across from him. "I know, but the world needed it. They needed to see that kindness can be stronger than fists." He looked at her with tired eyes. "They only care because they found out who I am. If I were just a stranger, they'd scroll past it." "Maybe," she said, "but you're not just a stranger. You're someone who stood up without shouting, who forgave when he had every right not to. People don't forget that." There was a long pause. Keanu sipped his coffee slowly. "I just want to fix the car. Not because people are watching, but because I promised my dad. And I keep my promises." Downstairs, a commotion began. Voices, hurried footsteps. Someone called out, "He's really here." Keanu closed his eyes for a second, gathering himself. It had begun. The town had found him, the world had found him, and there was no hiding anymore. When he stepped outside, the air felt heavier. Cameras clicked, questions flew. Reporters leaned in with microphones, asking about the bikers, the car, his reaction. But Keanu didn't answer. He walked past them, through the small crowd, straight to the edge of the parking lot where a man in overalls was waiting beside a tow truck. "You're Dave?" Keanu asked. The man nodded, holding out a hand. "You called for a restorer. I'm the best on this coast." Keanu shook his hand firmly. "Then let's get started." As the Mustang was loaded onto the truck, whispers rippled through the crowd. No one could believe he wasn't pressing charges. No one could understand why he had said no to interviews, to news channels offering money, to documentaries already being pitched. But Keanu wasn't interested in attention. He wanted closure. He wanted peace. Later that day, as the sun broke through the clouds and lit up the garage where Dave worked, Keanu stood beside him, going over the list of damages. It was bad. The engine was intact but bruised. The frame was bent. The paint was ruined. The interior had been slashed, but Dave didn't hesitate. "It'll take time," he said, "but she'll ride again, better than ever." Keanu nodded. "Just keep it original. No upgrades, no flash, just what it used to be." Dave smiled. "I get it. This isn't just a car. It's a memory." Keanu didn't respond, but the silence was agreement enough. As the days passed, word continued to spread. Local news stations aired the video every evening. Fan pages flooded with comments praising his character. Strangers mailed parts, donations, even letters to the bookstore addressed only to the quiet man upstairs. Still, Keanu remained unchanged. He didn't go online, didn't give speeches. Instead, he spent his days in the garage, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in oil, working side by side with Dave, restoring the soul of something sacred. But not everyone was celebrating. In a small bar just outside town, the three bikers sat, hunched over a table in silence. Chains's nose was broken, Rabbit's arm was in a sling. Viper nursed a bruise on his ribs he couldn't explain. The video had ruined them. Their names weren't mentioned, but locals recognized them. Their reputations were burned. No bar wanted them. No gang would associate with them. They had been humiliated, not just by a man, but by their own choices. And that bitterness began to fester. He ruined us, Rabbit spat. With one video. He didn't post it, Chains muttered. Someone else did. Doesn't matter, Viper said quietly. He made us look small, like fools. We are fools, Chains snapped. We trashed a car we didn't own, we didn't ask, we didn't care, and now look at us. Viper stood suddenly. I'm not apologizing, not to anyone, Rabbit grinned. Then what? Viper's eyes burned cold. Then we remind him that some wounds don't heal. But none of them knew that the storm they were thinking of creating would come face to face with something they had never dealt with before. Not violence, not power, not wealth, but a man who had nothing to prove. A man who had already lost more than they could ever take. A man who believed in peace but would not run from truth. And while they planned revenge in the shadows, Keanu was building something new in the light, one bolt at a time, one memory at a time. He didn't know they were coming. He didn't know the danger. But even if he had, it wouldn't have changed what he was doing, because for him the road ahead wasn't about fame or justice. It was about honoring a promise. And as he placed his father's old wrench on the edge of the workbench, wiping it, gently with a cloth, the world around him faded. The noise, the fame, the danger. He heard only one voice. Take your time, son. The engine will tell you when it's ready. And the engine? It had started whispering again. The scars beneath the steel. The air in the garage was warm with the scent of oil, dust, and memory. Rays of sunlight slipped in through the overhead windows, casting long rectangles across the cement floor where tools, bolts, and old blueprints were scattered like breadcrumbs from the past. It had been 3 weeks since the attack on the car, and in that time, something remarkable had begun to happen, not just to the Mustang, but to everyone around it. The town, once sleepy and unnoticed, had started to hum with quiet pride. Kids came by after school to peek through the garage windows. Retired mechanics volunteered their time, polishing trim and tightening bolts. And every now and then, strangers, who had seen the viral video, came just to drop off handwritten notes, old car parts, or simply to nod respectfully at Keanu as he worked in silence. None of them asked for photos. They somehow understood that this moment wasn't about celebrity. It was about healing. Keanu had become a ghost in his own fame. Each morning he would wake before dawn, walk down to the beach, sit on the cold sand for an hour, and then return to the garage where Dave waited with coffee and a short list of the day's tasks. The two men barely spoke unless necessary, but there was a rhythm to their silence, a mutual understanding. Dave, too, had lost someone, the love of his life, years ago, to illness. He didn't talk about it, but sometimes Keanu would catch him staring at the Mustang with that same look people wear at gravesides, not one of sorrow, but of deep, unspeakable reverence. The car itself was slowly coming back to life. The engine, after weeks of careful work, had finally roared again, not with fury but with purpose. The interior had been reupholstered by hand, matched perfectly to the way Keanu remembered it from his childhood. Even the radio, an old analog model his father had insisted on keeping, was restored to working order. When Keanu turned it on for the first time and heard the static hum before it clicked into a soft old jazz tune, he stood frozen, eyes stinging. For a moment, he was a boy again, in a garage in Toronto, standing beside a man who smelled of tobacco and gasoline, learning how to listen to machines with his heart. But outside the cocoon of the garage, the world was shifting. The video had reached global platforms. Interviews and op-eds flooded the internet, calling Keanu's response a masterclass in grace. Psychologists analyzed his restraint, influencers quoted his lines, and even news anchors who rarely agreed on anything all nodded with admiration. Yet Keanu stayed distant from it all. He didn't read the articles, he didn't scroll the comments, he didn't even own a working phone. His mind was here, in this town, in this car, and in the memory of the man who had once called him son. Meanwhile, the bikers were spiraling deeper into their own storm. They had gone into hiding after the backlash, moving from town to town, chased, not by police but by shame. Viper, once a leader of chaos, had grown quiet and brooding, nursing his bitterness like a wound he refused to let heal. Chains was restless, unable to sleep, haunted by the fact that even his own family had turned their backs on him. His sister had seen the video and called him a disgrace. Rabid, on the other hand, grew more unhinged with each passing day, convinced they were victims, not villains. They met one night in an abandoned cabin deep in the woods outside of town. The windows were boarded up, the roof sagged in places, and the air smelled of mold and desperation. Viper had a map spread out on a table lit by a flickering lantern. He pointed at the garage where the Mustang was being restored. "We end it. Where it started," he said. "You mean the car?" Rabbit asked, his eyes twitching. Viper nodded. "It's the symbol. They worship it now. Like it's holy. Like he's holy. We take it from them, from him. And this time, no cameras." Chains didn't speak. He stared at the floor, fists clenched. Part of him wanted out. Part of him wanted redemption. But pride was a prison, and he didn't have the key. So he nodded with the others, sealing his silence in shame. The plan was simple. Wait until the car was fully restored, then strike. Destroy it before it could be unveiled to the world again. This time, no witnesses, no forgiveness. Back at the garage, Keanu and Dave were putting the final touches on the exterior. The paint job, a matte black finish identical to the original, had dried beautifully. Keanu was down on one knee polishing the rims when Dave spoke softly, as if afraid to break the stillness. "You know, I think your dad would have been proud." Keanu paused. His fingers tightened on the rag. "I hope so." Dave set his tools down and leaned against the workbench. "He would have seen how you didn't let anger own you, how you chose to rebuild, not destroy. That's the kind of legacy most men dream of leaving behind." Keanu looked up, his expression unreadable. "It still hurts, Dave, not the car, but knowing he's not here to see it." "He sees it," Dave said without hesitation. "And he sees you." Later that night, Keanu stayed behind after Dave had gone home. The garage was quiet, lit only by the soft golden glow of a single hanging bulb. The Mustang sat in the center like a crown jewel. He walked around it slowly, fingertips brushing over the curves of the hood. Then he opened the driver's door, slid inside, and closed his eyes. The leather creaked beneath him. The silence held him. And then he heard it. A sound. Not from the car. From outside. A soft scrape. Then a footstep. His eyes opened. He turned slowly and saw a shadow moving near the side door. Instincts sharpened. He slipped out of the car and reached under the workbench where he had once placed an old metal flashlight. Not a weapon, but solid. The door creaked open, and standing there were all three of them. Viper. Chains. Rabid. For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension. The only sound was the slow ticking of the engine cooling off. Keanu took a step forward. "You shouldn't be here." Viper stepped in. "And yet, here we are." Chains looked at the car, his jaw tightening. Rabid held something behind his back. "Don't do this," Keanu said calmly. "You don't have to be this." Rabid laughed. "You think you can talk us down again?" Keanu shook his head. "No, I think you can walk away. That's different." Viper's eyes narrowed. "You think this car makes you strong? Makes you righteous?" "No," Keanu replied. "It makes me human, like all of us. And it reminds me what we lose when we choose hate over healing." But Rabid moved suddenly, lunging toward the car, raising what turned out to be a crowbar. He brought it down hard, but the metal never touched the Mustang. Chains had grabbed his arm, mid-swing. Rabid's eyes widened. "What?" "No," Chains said firmly. "Not again." Viper looked at him in disbelief. "You serious?" Chains stepped between them. "We destroyed enough already. I'm done being that man." Rabbit cursed, shoved him aside, and tried again. But Keanu stepped in, not with violence but with presence. Just standing there, between the car and the chaos. Eyes steady. Breath calm. "Go home," he said. Rabbit froze, shaking, then dropped the crowbar and fled into the night. Viper stared at Chains. For the first time, his eyes flickered with doubt. Then, without a word, he followed Rabbit into the dark. Only Chains remained. Keanu looked at him. "You stopped him." Chains swallowed hard. "I saw your face. The night we wrecked it. It wasn't rage. It was grief. I know that face." Keanu nodded slowly. "It's never too late to change." Chains looked at the Mustang, now gleaming. Under the garage lights, maybe not. And then he left. Keanu stood alone once more. The garage silent again. But something had shifted. A piece of hate had been stopped. A wound had begun to heal. And deep in the heart of that quiet garage, the Mustang waited, not as a symbol of revenge, but of something far more powerful. Redemption. When, the engine remembers. The day the Mustang was scheduled to be revealed, the town felt different. Not louder, not busier, just more alive. The streets, usually slow and quiet on a Thursday morning, now carried the hush of anticipation. Posters had gone up around the cafe and the bookstore, hand-drawn flyers that said nothing flashy, just a line that read, "The Mustang rides again, 5 p.m. at the Boardwalk Garage." It hadn't been marketed. There were no big announcements, no sponsors, no celebrities flying in. And yet, by afternoon, people began to arrive from towns over, even states over. They came not for a car, but for what the car had come to mean. They came for the story. And at the center of it all, without wanting to be, was Keanu Reeves. He didn't wear a suit or step onto a stage. He didn't even speak much. He spent the morning cleaning the Mustang, carefully wiping every inch of the restored body, checking the engine once more, tightening every bolt, every piece, more out of love than caution. Dave stood quietly nearby, watching him, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Together they shared the last few hours before the moment, like old friends who had been through a storm and made it to shore. Keanu barely looked up, but deep inside something was stirring, not nerves, not fear, but something heavier. Memory. He had dreamt of this day, but not like this. In his dream, his father was alive, standing next to him, arm around his shoulder, beaming with pride. They'd take the car down the coast together, windows down, music playing, two men who had finally found the time they had always lost. But reality was sharper. It carved its own path. And now, this car was not just a dream fulfilled, but a burden carried. Because behind the beauty, behind the applause waiting outside the garage door, was a lifetime of silence, a relationship left with words unspoken, a father buried with unfinished conversations. As the clock struck 5, Keanu looked at Dave. "Are we ready?" Dave smiled. "The car is. The question is, are you?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the side wall and picked up something wrapped in a soft cloth. He opened it gently, revealing a small, square photograph. It was old and faded, the edges curled. In it, a younger Keanu stood beside his father, both of them laughing, grease smeared on their faces, the shell of the Mustang behind them still, rusted and incomplete. Keanu held the photo against the dashboard of the car for a second, then tucked it into the glove compartment without a word. And then, together, they opened the garage door. The light poured in like a flood. Outside, the crowd that had quietly formed burst into spontaneous applause. Not the loud kind, but warm and respectful, like they knew they were witnessing something sacred. Keanu didn't wave. He didn't bow. He simply stepped back as the Mustang rolled out under its own power, engine purring like a heartbeat, paint gleaming in the sunlight. It was more than a car. It was a resurrection. Kids sat on their father's shoulders. Elderly couples held hands. A few men wiped their eyes when they saw it, because they remembered their own cars, their own fathers, their own promises left half-kept in garages that no longer existed. In that moment, the Mustang wasn't just Keanu's, it was everyone's. He got into the driver's seat, slowly, reverently, and as he placed his hands on the steering wheel, the entire crowd went quiet. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the breeze coming off the ocean. And then he drove, not fast, not loud, just steady, down the short road that led from the garage to the boardwalk. People parted for him like water, stepping aside, holding their breath. He made one slow loop, the engine steady and faithful, then brought the car to a stop right in front of the ocean. He got out, leaned against the door, and looked out at the horizon. It was exactly how he remembered it as a boy. The waves crashing, the sky glowing orange, the wind carrying the salt and silence of forever. But he wasn't alone. From the back of the crowd, someone stepped forward, a woman in her 50s with dark eyes and silver in her hair. She walked with purpose, carrying a small box in her hands. Keanu saw her and froze. "Maria?" he whispered. She nodded. It had been over 20 years. Maria was his father's last partner, the woman who had been there when his father fell sick, the one who had cared for him, who had held his hand in his final days. She stopped in front of Keanu and looked at the car, her eyes misting. "He would have loved this," she said. Keanu swallowed. "I wish he could have seen it." "He did," she replied. "He made me promise something, in case you ever finished it." She opened the box. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook. Keanu's breath caught. "His journal," Maria said gently. "He wrote it during the last year. Every day. Thoughts, sketches, memories, and letters. Especially letters. To you." Keanu took the box with trembling hands. The world around him vanished. The applause, the cameras, the attention, all gone. There was only the soft weight of the journal and the memory of a voice he hadn't heard in years. He opened it. The handwriting was rough but familiar. Day 1. "The doctors say it's bad. I don't know how to tell him. I just want to see the Mustang ride again. With him. One last time." Keanu read on, page after page, his father's voice filling the spaces grief had left hollow. Memories of building the car. Thoughts about the mistakes he made. Regrets. Apologies. Love that had never been said out loud. And on the last page, "If you ever read this, son, I'm sorry I left before the road was finished. But I hope you kept driving. I hope you found something worth chasing. And I hope this engine remembers us." Keanu closed the journal. His hands were shaking. Maria touched his shoulder gently. "He knew you'd finish it, he just didn't know how long it would take." The crowd remained silent, not knowing what was being said, but sensing something deeply personal was unfolding. And then Keanu, without saying a word to anyone else, got back into the Mustang. He started the engine. It roared with strength, with purpose, with memory. And he drove. Away from the crowd, down the coastal road. No destination, no fame. Just the open road, the wind, and his father's voice written between the lines of every mile. The Mustang had been restored, but more importantly, so had he. The road that remembered him. It had been 2 weeks since Keanu Reeves had driven the Mustang down that coastal road, the engine singing a tune that had once only lived in the pages of his father's journal. People said they could still hear it. Some said it wasn't the engine they heard, but the way it had carried the past into the present, stitching together the broken pieces of a story that had once seemed lost. In the town, his quiet departure hadn't left a void. It left something warmer, stronger, the kind of stillness that follows a meaningful conversation. People didn't forget what he'd done. They carried it, like a weight that didn't drag you down but reminded you to stand taller. But what no one saw was where Keanu went after that drive. He didn't go to a hotel or back to the city. He didn't fly out or disappear like celebrities do when the cameras fade. He kept driving, not to escape, but to listen. Something deep inside him had awakened after reading his father's journal. It wasn't just grief. It was the realization that he had spent much of his life giving to others, through films, through charity, through kindness, yet never truly giving himself the permission to feel. Always quiet, always respectful, always holding his pain like a secret. But now, with every mile, he was letting himself remember. And in that remembering, he began to heal. One morning, long before the sun rose, he stopped at a roadside diner in a forgotten town that hadn't updated its menu in 30 years. The waitress didn't recognize him. Neither did the cook. But Keanu liked it that way. He sat at the back corner booth, ordered black coffee and eggs, and opened his father's journal again. He had read it 3 times by now, but certain lines always hit different depending on the day. That morning he stopped on a short entry. Keanu always had a quiet strength, never liked shouting. But if he ever raises his voice, it means the world needs to listen. He set the journal down and stared out the window. The world outside was still dark, but it reminded him of the night he had stepped in front of his wrecked Mustang and faced 3 men filled with rage. Not with fists, not with threats, just presence, just truth. And now, 2 of those men had vanished from the story, but one hadn't. Chains. Keanu hadn't forgotten him. While the crowd had praised the moment the car was revealed, Keanu had noticed one person standing far back, half in shadow. Not a fan. Not a stranger, but a man who looked like he had shown up for something other than spectacle. And when Chains had slipped away, Keanu made a quiet promise to himself. Not for justice, not for closure, but for something far more complicated. For understanding. And so over the next few days, Keanu began searching, not using fame, not through legal means, but by asking small questions in quiet places. He went to bike shops, old garages, diners, like the one he sat in now. He didn't say who he was. He just asked about a man with a scar on his knuckle, a slow limp, and eyes that carried guilt like a loaded backpack. Then, one evening, as dusk painted the sky in ash and rust, he found Chains was working at a scrapyard in a forgotten corner of the county. No one had hired him officially. He just showed up weeks ago, offered to lift and load, and didn't ask for money. He slept in an old van behind the lot and kept to himself. The owner, a grizzled man named Tommy, let him stay because he worked like he had something to make up for. Keanu didn't announce himself. He walked quietly into the yard as Chains lifted a rusted engine block onto a dolly. The clank of metal echoed through the yard. When Chains turned around, his face froze. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, Keanu said, "I've been looking for you." Chains set down his wrench slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Figured you might." "Why?" Chains shrugged. "Because you're not the kind of man who lets stories end without finishing the last chapter." Keanu took a breath. "I'm not here to shame you. I'm not here to fix you either. But that night, when you stopped him, it changed something. Not just for me. For you too." Chains nodded. "I think I felt my father that night. Haven't thought about him in years. He died before I turned 20. Never saw the man I became, and maybe that's a blessing." "He would have wanted you to change," Keanu said gently. "Just like mine did." Chains looked at him, eyes heavy. "What do you want from me?" Keanu stepped forward. "I'm building something. Something bigger than a car. A community project. Not for fame, not for fans. A place for restoration, old cars, broken people, shared stories. Not charity. Honor. And I want you to help me start it." Chains was stunned. "Me?" "Yes. After everything I did," Keanu's voice was steady. "The world is full of people who tear others down because they never had someone believe they could build anything. I believe you can build again. Not just machines, yourself." There was a long silence. Then Chains whispered, "I don't deserve this. Neither did I deserve forgiveness from my father, but he gave it to me anyway." Chains looked away, eyes burning. "I don't even know where to begin. Keanu smiled faintly. At the beginning, where all good stories start. That night, the two men sat by the fire behind the scrapyard, drinking old coffee from a dented thermos and talking, not about the past, but the future. Keanu told him about the land near the coast where he wanted to build a small restoration garage, a place where veterans, former inmates, and troubled youth could come and learn to build cars, build trust, and build dignity. "I want it to be a place where broken things are welcomed," Keanu said, "and where the goal isn't perfection, it's progress." Chains said nothing for a while. Then finally he looked at Keanu and said, "I'll help. Not because I think I deserve a second chance, but because maybe someone else will see me and believe they do." And so, a new chapter began. The garage wasn't fancy, just an old barn on a quiet plot of land. But it had bones. And more importantly, it had spirit. Keanu and Chains began fixing it up, one board at a time. Soon, others joined. People who had once been cast aside. A teenage girl with a shaved head and grease under her fingernails who had been in and out of foster homes. A retired soldier who had lost everything but his hands. A quiet boy who had never spoken a full sentence until he saw the Mustang in person and whispered, "It's beautiful." They called it the road that remembers, and every time someone walked in with nothing but a broken part and a heavier heart, Keanu would hand them a wrench and say, "Start here," because he knew the best engines don't just run on fuel, they run on redemption. When silence speaks louder than engines, months had passed since the world last heard about Keanu Reeves and the Mustang that rose from the ashes. Most assumed the story had ended with the public reveal and the viral headlines, a brief spark of goodness in an otherwise noisy world. But what they didn't know was that the real story had only just begun, tucked away far from cameras and talk shows, in a dusty coastal garage surrounded by fields, salt, and the smell of rust and redemption. No marketing banners, no fanfare. Just an old wooden sign above the wide entrance, scorched by sun and time, that simply read, "The road that remembers." What began with Keanu and Chains had grown into something few could have imagined. By the end of spring, the garage had become a sanctuary for the lost and the willing. Not a charity, not a project, but a movement. People who had hit rock bottom found something to stand on there, not sympathy, but purpose. Every corner of the workshop told a story. Old engines humming again. Parts that were once left for scrap now restored with patience. Laughter rising from tired souls who had almost forgotten what joy sounded like. There was always work to be done, but that was the point. Work healed. Keanu didn't put his name on it. He never stood in front of the place as the owner. Instead, he worked quietly every day, wearing gloves, sanding metal, guiding hands that had never held tools before. His fame had long faded in the minds of those who worked beside him. To them, he wasn't a star. He was just Keanu, the man who arrived first and left last, the one who remembered everyone's story but never talked much about his own. But one evening, as the summer winds turned warmer and the sea air became thicker with salt, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, its envelope stained and slightly torn. It wasn't addressed to the road that remembers, but to KeanuReeves, where engines go to heal. Keanu read it under the dim garage light, seated on an old milk crate while others packed, up for the night. It was from Rabid, the last of the three bikers, the only one who hadn't returned, hadn't apologized, hadn't shown his face since the night chain stopped him from destroying the Mustang a second time. Keanu unfolded the paper, and as he read, the room seemed to grow quieter, as if the walls themselves leaned in. "Keanu, you probably didn't expect to hear from me. Truth is, I didn't expect to write you either, but I've watched from far. I saw what you built, saw Chains working beside you, saw the kids smiling in photos someone posted. I hated it at first. Hated that the world moved on. Hated that no one remembered what we did. But now, I think that's what I feared most. Not punishment, being forgotten. You said that night we could walk away. I didn't. But I've been walking ever since. Not from you, from myself. And I'm tired. I want to fix something. I don't know what. Maybe I never will. But if there's a place in that shop for a man who's made every mistake twice, I'd like to try once for real. No need to write back. I'll just show up if the door's open. R. Keanu folded the letter and tucked it into the small pocket of his shirt. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't call anyone. Instead, he walked to the wide door, turned on the outside light, and left the door unlocked that night. Just in case. The next morning, Rabbit arrived. Not loud, not wild-eyed, just quiet. He wore an old hoodie, hands in his pockets, and a look that wasn't looking for forgiveness, only a place to work. Keanu didn't speak when he saw him. He simply handed him a pair of gloves and pointed to an old Chevy in the corner that needed the radiator pulled out. Rabbit didn't say thank you. He just got to work. And so, the final piece fell into place. 3 men who had once shattered something sacred had now, in their own ways, chosen to rebuild. Not because they were perfect, but because someone showed them that broken doesn't mean worthless. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, something unexpected happened. A man and a boy walked into the garage. The man wore a neatly pressed shirt, military tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves. The boy clung to his hand, no older than 8, his eyes filled with wonder. "I'm looking for Keanu," the man said. Keanu looked up from under a truck hood. "That's me." The man introduced himself as Matthew, said he had seen the video of the Mustang, said he had served with someone who once told him, "When you're lost, find the place that fixes more than engines." He had driven hours to get here. He knelt down beside his son. "This is Jake," he said. "He lost his voice last year. Trauma. We've tried everything. Therapy, schools. Nothing's worked. He won't talk to anyone." Keanu nodded gently. "You want to show him the place?" The boy looked around. Keanu walked him over to the Mustang, still polished and resting proudly near the front of the garage. He opened the passenger door and nodded for Jake to climb in. The boy hesitated, then slipped inside. His small hands ran over the dashboard. His eyes widened at the engine. Keanu started the ignition. The Mustang roared softly, steady as ever. Jake smiled, and then he spoke. Not loud, not much, but clear. He said, "It's alive." Everyone in the garage froze. Matthew's eyes filled with tears. Keanu didn't react with shock. He just smiled gently. Because he had always known that engines remember things people forget. Sounds, vibrations, promises. And somehow, the Mustang had remembered Jake too. By the end of that summer, the road that remembers had expanded, not in size but in soul. It had become more than a garage. It was a living journal of second chances, a place where silence was heard, where wounds weren't hidden, and where the sound of an engine starting was never just about mechanics, but about motion, meaning, and memory. Keanu never returned to Hollywood full-time. He didn't need to, because here, under the open sky and beside people who had once been forgotten, he had found a greater role. Not a character to play, but a life to live. One where kindness wasn't a performance. It was the foundation. And every night as the last light turned off in the garage, he would stand beside the Mustang, touch the hood, and whisper softly, "We're still driving, Dad."